Hi, my name is Janett, and this is my presentation on the ethical issue for my critical assignment. I would like to introduce the agenda for my presentation. I will begin by introducing the ethical dilemma or issue, followed by ethical theories and principles according to my issue, the legal viewpoints for the issue, legal profession and its relevance to the issue or ethical dilemma, the specific laws relevant to the issue, moral arguments, and lastly, the Christian perspective that will tie in with the issue chosen. As you may know, public health carries many issues and dilemmas within its profession. However, upon doing some research, I did narrow it down and went ahead and chose the issue or dilemma of patient-informed consent for the focus of this presentation. So why is patient-informed consent a public health issue? I was able to curate an answer for this presentation, and it's basically a balance between the patient's respect for their autonomy and the provider's responsibility to really ensure the patients are understanding the risk factors, benefits, and many of the alternatives involved in treatment for their procedures or medical care. Involving information that oftentimes is complex and hard to understand, which is why being able to clearly convey this information makes a huge impact in the resolution and the health outcomes of these patients because they're able then to make informed decisions on their medical care and their planning. So as you can see on this slide, I would like to expand on the main concepts of patient-informed consent, starting with comprehension. Comprehension to me is going to be the most vital key point on this presentation because without comprehension, without having the patient understanding the situation, the risks, the benefits, then they will not be able to make any informed decisions on their healthcare plans. So comprehension will give them the ability to understand information. Of course, if it's clearly provided, therefore they will be able to make those informed decisions. Disclosure, this is mainly to provide relevant information about their treatments and procedures, while of course not keeping out those risk factors, risks during procedures and after, and also the benefits. Voluntariness, this involves patient consent. You know, they must be freely able to participate in this decision making without any sort of coercion or intimidation or sort of persuasion, either from their family members or even from their healthcare team. Voluntariness is also going to be vital. Specificity is another concept that I have found to be vital and important when it comes to patient-informed consent. Um, Plans must be clearly stated, provided, and just laid out regarding procedures and not generalized. So they must be provided in a specific way without any generalization on medical care or outcomes so that they know exactly what is to come and what is to be expected. Therefore, they are ready and they are informed and they can make those decisions well equipped. So aside from those main concepts that I discussed on the previous slide, there is other considerations that tie in really closely with those concepts. When I talked about comprehension, we can then talk about medical language. Oftentimes, medical diction is complex. It's not a language commonly used in society if you are not part of the medical field or if you're not familiar with these terms. So medical language complexity is going to also be trivial for a patient to be able to provide consent on whether or not they understand what is being told to them, what they're being explained, and how this treatment or procedure will benefit their health on the long run or afterwards. And of course, while also understanding their risks. Inferiority is oftentimes an issue. We can also see this like as a power trip or a power dynamic. It could be controversial. Um, it's an imbalance between levels of stature, often from providers. And this may become sometimes intimidating for patients, and that is definitely not vital for the outcome of patient health. We want to make sure patients are feeling comfortable with what is going on with their health care, trusting their care team, being able to feel vulnerable and open so that their outcome is essentially the best one. Cultural pressures are often also very present, society or from family. They may pressure and possess an influence in patients' consent to some procedures or treatments. This is more of an internal argument that the patient may develop, but oftentimes it ties in with these major concepts of patient consent. And I believe we should talk about them. We should make sure that we are not coercing our patients into this dilemmas and pressures to make sure that their health outcomes are essentially the best ones. And then, of course, the capacity for them to consent. This can be seen with minors or with the disabled who cannot make their own decisions and have to rely on someone else to make those medical decisions for them. This is often a dilemma and an issue on its own, and it's very debatable between who should do it, who should take over, etc., who should be making these decisions. However, when it comes to that moment in time when a decision has to be made, someone must be appointed. But it is also something that ties in with autonomy and making sure that the best decisions are made towards our patient's health, keeping in mind the best outcomes. I had a lot of fun researching on policy and how much informed consent has impacted the development processes for policy making for our officials. The ethical theory of patient autonomy is just it's the very foundation of patient consent. Patient consent is vital for the development of health policies in the United States and throughout the world, since it does influence the framework that makes up medical treatments and shapes scientific research, all while making sure that our patients' rights are protected and that they are well informed and they're able to make those informed decisions regarding their health care and their healthcare outcomes. So on this slide, I would like to really dig down on how the effects of informed policy have on the development of our policies. So to begin with, I would like to set the example on patient consent involved in permitting someone to make those medical decisions when assigning an advance directive. This allows patients to maintain their autonomy, their word, their desires, even when they are too ill to make their own decisions down the line. Another great example is how patient consent impacts policy development in telehealth and telemed. When telehealth policies are outlined and developed, informed consent is a key requirement here for the implementation of such services, mainly because there's going to be interaction between providers. There's going to be interaction between provider and patient, maybe some medical record sharing, and other privacy statutes, which will require these policies to be present and clearly stated when our patients are using these platforms for their care. Um, Another great example would be policy involvement in research ethics. So, when developing policies relating to clinical research, scientific research, medical research, patient consent is going to be essential to make sure that their rights are being protected, to make sure that ethical viewpoints are being respected and conducted in order to protect those research participants. So there is policy already established. We can see that on the Belmont report, how there is policy, how there's guidelines for the protection of the rights of human subjects when it comes to research. So that's a great interaction of how policy, patient consent ties together. Shared decision making is another great and effective way of seeing how health policies encourage the collaboration between healthcare patients and their families. This opens great ways for communication, and just the sharing of information can sometimes become tricky, which is why there has to be statute for it. There has to be some laws, some implementation of guidelines to making sure this sharing of information is safe, protected, and legal at the end of the day. Having that said, legal implications, policies must be designed to follow these laws, to follow legal regards, to follow patient consent laws, including the disclosure of the risks that our patients may face during procedures and medical treatment, as well as the benefits, and how they always have the choice and the chance to refuse those treatments, to refuse those medical interventions if they feel it is not proper or if they feel it is not correct for them to proceed upon their understanding, their full understanding of the risks and benefits involved. We can see a social justice involvement in patient-informed consent. Um, you can see these in the list I have provided, but mainly the involvement of patient consent by ensuring that everyone, regardless of their social background, their identity, their race, religion, gender, etc., is the ability to fully understand and participate in these decision-making processes regarding their own healthcare is through informed consent. This is by addressing potential barriers like language, cultural differences, inequalities in the system that may often, and we do see that they prevent them from making their own choices and their own decisions about their procedures, about their treatments. We can tie this to one of our previous slides with social pressure and family pressure and how that shapes oftentimes how a patient makes their decisions, how a patient approaches their procedures and their decisions to proceed or not with a medical treatment. It is oftentimes hard because if they don't have the capacity to communicate with their provider, then there is that disconnect. If they don't feel comfortable culturally because it's a different religion, men to female, or etc. It could be a diverse amount of cultural discrepancies or inequalities that may not make our patients feel comfortable, and that will oftentimes derail them from that patient informed consent to be in depth, informed, clear, and just to touch all bases. Going to these bullet points I have listed, just a big change in a big way for this to really impact the well being of our patients would be to culturally inclusive, include health education curriculums that are inclusive, culturally inclusive, offering healthcare workers training on cultural competency. That way, they're able to approach different cultures, different ethnic groups and races more properly and more graciously. Providing interpretation services to patients. This is very common now with healthcare, especially. They have now provided systems that are very versatile, very almost like a FaceTime or a live person on a monitor being able to actively translate with healthcare providers and patient to make their care quick, efficient, fast, well informed. And I think those are the little changes that are really going to impact the medical system in the US and really all over the world. Point number 4 here is being aware of socioeconomic statuses when offering treatment plans and other medical care plans. When a provider is aware of a status, then they can offer alternative choices. They can offer maybe a treatment plan that is not going to involve something so um, just involving something very pricey or extensive testing or that may oftentimes not be very necessary. So being aware of that socioeconomic status would play a vital impact. And then lastly, just advocating for policies that support healthcare access to all, really wanting to push that health for everyone and inclusiveness throughout all of the healthcare systems, just to make sure that everyone is being offered and treated fairly and respectfully. Because at the end of the day, we're all humans. We all deserve to be treated correctly and to be provided with healthcare services just like any other person. We can now start to understand that informed patient consent poses a great responsibility to not only healthcare providers, but health systems in general. Um, Understanding the legal profession is going to be crucial and vital for patients to establish that clear framework between obtaining consent and protecting patients from unwanted medical interventions. Um, this would be acquired, by valid agreements and potentially by holding healthcare providers liable if they fail to properly inform patients about their treatment options and about the risks and benefits involved. You're ultimately safeguarding the patient's rights to make those autonomous decisions about their healthcare outcomes. And then we can see some key points that are very relevant with this topic. Without proper patient consent, medical procedures can be escalated and considered a form of assault and battery, which is a legal offense. Physicians and health systems may get in trouble with the law if informed consent was not received by the patient, if consent in general was not provided by the patient, resulting in assault charges to physicians and lawsuits, etc. Legal standards define that information must be disclosed to patients to be considered informed about their treatment, their options, the risks and benefits. Patient autonomy is a key point here, and it's been a recurring topic throughout the presentation so far. It is a legal concept of informed consent, which upholds a patient's right to make their own healthcare decisions based on the information that their providers or health team have provided them with. Again, making sure it's clear, making sure it's relatable, making sure that they can comprehend what is being provided to them for understanding. Um, there's oftentimes an impact on documentation. Healthcare professionals need to document these informed consent processes because this will demonstrate that these providers are adequately informing the patient thoroughly and covering all their bases, making sure that comprehension is present. Regarding capacity assessment, these are guidelines regarding patient capacities to determine if a patient is competent enough to make those informed decisions. So those assessments do need to be done on patients, and oftentimes healthcare providers can determine upon their assessments for next steps. Jurisdictional variations is a legal standard for informed consent. Can differ by locations, though, requiring healthcare providers to stay updated on local regulations. So they'll have to make sure they stick to the laws and the guidelines provided by their state, oftentimes by their city or by federal laws. So there are a number of laws, both federal and state, depending on the state, that tie in with patient-informed consent norms. For example, there is Federal Law 42 CFR Part 2, which is the common rule. Part 2 pretty much requires each disclosure of information made with written patient consent to be accompanied by written statements that the information disclosed is protected by federal law and that the recipient cannot make any further disclosure of it unless permitted by regulations. After that, we have Federal Law 45 CFR 46.116. This law states that no investigator may involve a human being as a subject unless the investigator has obtained the legally effective informed consent of the subject or the subject's legally authorized representative. Following that, we have Federal Law 38 CFR 17.32 that says no medical treatment or procedure may be performed without the prior voluntary informed consent of the patient. In order to give informed consent, the patient must be able to make that decision and must have the capacity to make an informed decision. And then lastly, our HIPAA guidelines, which establishes national standards for protecting health information. It gives individuals the rights over their health information. For example, they can get a copy of their records and request any corrections, etc. To dive a little bit deeper into the elements of patient-informed consent and laws, I wanted to expand on capacity to consent per the patient. So for this, the patient must be deemed mentally competent to understand what information they're being provided. What is it that they're giving them that the situation presents that they're able to understand and grasp that information. And this is for them to be able to make that decision. So the capacity to consent, making sure the patient is able to make those informed decisions. Disclosure of patient information. This is going to be for healthcare providers to be able to disclose all relevant information about the treatment, including potential risks, as we've mentioned before, all the alternative options for their treatment, the benefits of the treatment, and of course, the ability for them to be able to refuse the treatment. For voluntary agreements, the patients must be able to consent freely without them being coerced into this or pressured or influenced. So they must voluntarily agree to what is being presented. And another main element here would be documentation. So the consent should be documented in a clearly and understandable manner. Now times everything is electronic, so there's always a paper trail, an electronic form, a paper form, but as long as they are signed, then they have become an informed consent, and that is a documentation and can be used to protect the patient, um, protect patient rights, and then be able to use in a court of law, etc., if any issues may arise or become more um, complicated. So, with any issue or dilemma, we are going to have some moral arguments arise. While patient consent is generally considered the most vital unit in medical ethics, potentially moral arguments will always come to light. And it may include situations where patients' decision-making capacity is compromised due to illness, disability, or just mental capacities, where providing full disclosure could actually cause significant harm to these patients, or when the patient's choice could impact the life of others in a negative way, potentially justifying limited or overridden consent in certain extreme cases. However, these arguments must be carefully weighted against the fundamental principle of autonomy, and just keeping in mind that patient consent is going to always come first. Patient health outcomes are going to be focused always on the positive. We want to make sure that positive health outcomes are really the goal and target for any procedures. But that informed consent sometimes can become a little bit blurry if the capacity of the patient is not there. However, then this is when advanced directives come in or power of attorneys come in to alleviate those issues. However, those moral arguments oftentimes remain, but it's one of those things that we just have to make those best decisions for the health of the patient. Cultural and social norms. In certain cultures, family members, community leaders, clergy, oftentimes may hold significant influence over the medical decisions that patients make, leading them to maybe a situation where a patient consented to a procedure, knowing the risks and benefits, but may not fully want that and may not really go want to proceed. But due to that influence on from their social and cultural surroundings and environment, may potentially pose a moral argument there. And really misunderstanding of information or misinformation, even when providing a patient with full disclosure, patients may still not fully understand the information they are given because, again, there's complexity in the medical language, or just there is limitations in understanding. And this can also lead to poorly informed decisions for our patients. We can see a Christian perspective pertaining to patient-informed consent directly from the Bible that ties in with these ethical principles and views. To begin with, we can see respect for autonomy, compassion and understanding, coercion. We can see all these topics in within the Bible that we can really tie in with the patient-informed consent issue that we have been discussing throughout that I have been discussing throughout the presentation. So I would like to expand first on respect for autonomy, we can see that in Galatians 4, verses 1 to 2. And it reads, "Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, does not differ at all from a slave, though he is a master of all, but is under guardians and stewards until the time appointed by the Father." So, really, to explain this verse a little bit deeper, it uses the analogy of an heir who's still a child, referring that he has no real control yet over his inheritance or what will come, even though he technically already owns it and it's under the authority of other people or guardians until he becomes of mature age. In this case, Paul applies this to Christian life, suggesting that before receiving Jesus Christ or God, believers were like children under the law of the King, but now through faith they are free and can directly access all the blessings and benefits of believing in God, and knowing that He is their Father. Following, we have compassion and understanding. Um, so in healthcare, um, being able to share compassion and generosity, understanding of the relevance of these patient physician relationships and the impact that the assistance will provide on the long run is vital. We can see it tie in with Ephesians 4:32, and it reads, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as in God has forgiven you." So this verse summarizes the biblical message that people should be kind, they should be compassionate, they should be forgiven. In healthcare, I have seen it happen. The physicians and providers become almost numb to patient suffering, to patient concern, and as a Christian, you always want to make sure you're showing that compassion that God showed for humanity upon that cross. And I think it's the perfect example of how compassion and understanding has to tie in with being able to provide information that is understandable for patients to make informed decisions. And then lastly, the concept of coercion. In the Bible, we can see this in 2 Corinthians 11:20, and it reads, "In fact, you even put up with anyone who enslaves you or exploits you, or takes advantage of you, or puts on airs or slaps you in the face." So this is written by Paul. And he's saying that the Corinthians gladly put up with these horrible people, um, because they are supposed to be the wise. He's using this uh, beating terms really to get the Corinthians to see they are alone, and they are alone are responsible for giving um, time and attention to false preachers and false masters and false teachers that are amongst them. So that ties in with coercion. We don't want to be falsifying any information in any medical setting or anything pertaining to patient information. Um, Even though some providers may feel the need to exaggerate or maybe try to persuade a patient towards getting treatment for payouts, for monetary reasons, for code input, etc., that coercion should never be present. That manipulation should not be present when it comes to patient-informed consent. Just circling back over with respect for autonomy, um, when a provider, healthcare system, etc., when there is that respect for patient autonomy, they will want to really explain to the patient, really provide a sense of relief or a sense of just information, really, for the patient to have that knowledge before they're going into the OR to be treated or to have a procedure done. So if there is that respect, that's not going to be on the line. And that's going to be a vital concept here pertaining to patient-informed consent. Those are my 2 cents on Christian perspective pertaining to patient-informed consent. Of course, there's always other concepts that we can expand on. There's many other things, such as, I don't know, nonverbal cues that maybe people can identify as informed consent, or, some ways that a provider or someone, a case manager, can identify as accepting of the rulings or the information of the risks and benefits. So it doesn't end there. There is much more to it. We can expand on this topic for hours and hours and hours, because it's so vital for healthcare implementation, for proper legal purposes, and for documentation purposes. But this has been the completion of my presentation. The following slide will just show references. And thank you, Professor, for taking the time to listen to every aspect of my analysis. Thank you. I really appreciate you.